Hello and welcome to Microsoft Hates Greg. My name is Greg Deckler, and today we're going to be looking at some more kind of interesting DAX, I guess you could say. And this comes out of a forum post out on the community sites where basically they're looking for essentially what a date diff. But in this case, they want it to act more like a rolling date diff. And their specific scenario is by month. So essentially, let's say today is June 4th. So 1 month should only go back to May 4th, for example, right? So anytime between May 4th to June 4th is 1 month. If it's May 1st, then that would be technically 2 months, right? Which is a little different than how date diff works. So let's get into it. I took this approach. I provided some ways of doing it. Here is a measure, and here is a column, and then I have kind of a simple version. But then I wanted to expand this and say, well, what if we use a rolling date diff by day, by year, by quarter? What would that look like exactly? So I built it and figured I'd show it off. See what everybody thought about it. All right, so let's take a look. So here on my screen, I've got a simple table. And so you can see here, I've got various different dates, like December 31st, 2022 is 18 months ago, according to DATEDIFF. And then here's an example of, June 1st of 2023 is 12 months ago, and June 14th is 2023 is 12 months ago. But in a rolling scenario, right, this June 14th, 2023 would be 12 months ago, but this date would be 13 months ago, right? Because it's previous to, June 4th, 2023. So in a rolling date diff scenario, we'd want that to be 13 months, not 12. Let's get into the little DAX here. We'll start with month. And as you can imagine, this is the classic, date diff, by month, essentially. So you have your date diff, you grab our max purchase date. We compare that with today, and we tell it we want to increment of them by month. And so that's what gives us our values in our first column over here. So that's how that would work. Now, a simple scenario for this, and I've got this rolling month date diff. Simple scenario would be, if I can actually get my Zoom to work here, we grab today, we grab the max purchase date, we do a date diff, right, between date today by month, just like we would normal date diff. And then our result, we'd say if the day of date is less than the day of today, we add 1 to the value, otherwise we just return the value. And we can return the result. And you can see here that we get back, so this returns 13, like we would want it to. This returns 12. So there you go. That was how, and again, this would be, not 5 months ago, it'd be 6 months because it's the 1st of January instead of, if it was January 4th or January 5th, then that would be 5. But in our scenario of rolling date diff by month, it'd be 6. And the same thing with May versus May 14th versus May 1st, right? 1 month versus 2 months. And so that's how you can see how they differ. But that's no fun, right? What if we is there a scenario where we completely get rid of date diff entirely? So to hell with date diff, we don't need it, right? So I created this version. I'll zoom in here. And so what we can do here is, again, we grab our today, grab our max purchase date. We create a years table. So we just generate a series between the year of the date and the year of today, increment by 1, and we select just the year out of it because we don't need the index column, right? And that generates series produce or anything like that. Or actually, what we want to do is all we need to do here is, because we're going to do a cross join later, we want to rename that value column to year. So it doesn't conflict with our next table that we have, which is our months table. And so we do a select columns out of, I just built a simple manual table, 1 through 12. I could have used a generate series there if I had 1 to 12 to increment by 1, but I don't know why I did it that way, but who cares? We just need a table that goes from 1 to 12 in increments of 1. And then we do a select columns there to rename that month, the value column to month. So now what we can do is we can do a cross join between the years and months column. So we have a Cartesian product of our years and our months. And we add a column to that called year month, which is year times 100 plus month. So that gives us kind of a unique ID for each one of those rows. So now what we can do then is we can filter that table where the year month is less than the year of today times 100 plus month of today, and the year of month is greater than the year of the date variable, right, which is a purchase date, times 100 plus the month of that date. And all we have to do is do a count rows of that. And then there's our same formula here, right? You know, the result is if the day of today is less than the day of date, then we subtract 1. So we just did a little differently there. And otherwise, we ended up with pre-result, right? So either way you do it, you know, you can just flip the logic, obviously, the greater than, less than, either add 1 or subtract 1, however you want to do it. And you can see that we get 18. 18 agrees with our rolling month date diff, our simple version, right? 18, 18, 13, 12, 6, 6, 2, and 1. Okay, so that's the month version, the rolling month version. Now, Alexa probably is not sure about that. Okay, I don't know if anybody heard that, but I think my refrigerator was talking to me. In any case, so now what about date diff by day, by quarter, by year? It actually gets a little tricky in some of these cases, but not really date diff by day. So obviously date diff by day, right? It's the same as the month one, only we use day as our third parameter, right? That's pretty simple, but it's really even easier. It's just math, because again, every date is really just an integer, right? In terms of from December 30th, 1899, right? The integer portion is the number of days since that date, the decimal being, you know, fractions of a day. So really all we have to do is just to subtract today from the max purchase date, make sure we turn it into a number versus the date, otherwise it's going to look weird. And I did a trunk on it just to make sure, you know, I didn't really need to do that, but however you want to do it. And we can obviously, so you don't need date diff if you're just doing by day. It's just math, people. It's just subtracting the two dates from each other and making sure you return it as a integer or a number value. Okay, so now next we get into a little more interesting. You would think that year would be simple, but it actually is not as quite simple as it appears. And even the interesting thing about this is that it makes the way date diff. I hate black box DAX functions. I hate black box functions in general. I hate them, especially the time intelligence functions, which date diff is technically not a time intelligence function. It somehow falls outside of that scope, at least as it's categorized on the official websites by Microsoft. But date diff suffers from some of the similar flaws as time intelligence functions, namely that it only thinks about time in a single way. It's hard-coded to only think about time in a single way. So if you think about like date diff by year, okay, yeah, December 31st, 2023 happens to be, you know, last year. It's 2023, but it's really only 6 months ago, right? It's so thinking of that as, you know, thinking that as that there's a year's difference between that date and today is kind of stupid. In a certain, you really think about it. It'd make much more sense if it was, again, more of a rolling year. So how do we implement a rolling date diff for a year? Well, here's the DAX for it, and it actually is surprising. I was surprised at the complexity of this one. And maybe there's a simpler way to do it, and people can point out where I'm stupid. But the way I did it was I generate my year the same way I did before in my rolling month. Now, I don't need to cross join it with anything or anything like that. I just have to count how many rows are in that year table. Now, here's where it gets interesting, right? So if the result of the count rows is 1, right, then they're within the same calendar year, right? Because they both return the year of the date and the year of today, both return the same year. So if there's only 1 row, then we just return 0. They're both in the same year. So the way date diff does dates, if they're in the same year, returns, you know, a year date diff in the same for 2 dates in the same year, return a 0. So we're going to follow that pattern. And here's where it gets just interesting. So if the month of the date is less than the month of today, then we know that it's basically in the back half of the year. So let's say we're in June today. We know that anything in July, August, September, October, November, that sort of thing is going to fall within the, technically the same rolling year calculation. So we return just the count of the rows in that case. But if the month of the date is greater than the month of today, then we return the pre-result -1, right? So we know that it falls into the next year in the past, essentially. So now we're dealing with, dates. The month of the date is May versus June. So we're going to subtract 1 off of the count rows again. And again, you can always flip this logic, right? These greater than, less thans, and whether you're not subtracting 1 or adding 1 or how you want to do it. So now all we're left with is, oh, well, the date, the month of the date, and the month of our today is actually in the same month because we've ruled out the other possibilities, right? Remember how switch true just kind of falls through the logic. So we've ruled out that there's just 1 year. We've ruled out the fact that the month is less than, today's month. We've ruled out the month is greater than today's month. So the months must be equal. So now what we can do is we can say, okay, so if the day of date is less than the day of today, we return the pre-result, right? We return the count rows of our table that we have. Versus if it's greater than, then we do result -1. So again, you can follow the logic there. So that essentially now if we do a year, again, so a year would be DATEDIFF year, right? So this, I'm getting my wires crossed here. I changed the order of these. Okay, so the DATEDIFF year, right? Remember, June 1st, we return 1, June 14th returns 1. But in our scenario of a rolling DATEDIFF, that's this column, we have a June 14th of last year, we return 1, but June 1st of last year, we return 2, because we've reached that breakoff point of our rolling year, which is June 4th, 2023. So there you go. So that's how they're different. Now, quarter potentially gets even more interesting. And again, this is how I did it. There may be easier, simpler ways of doing it. But again, DATEDIFF of quarters the same way. It's kind of stupid about how it thinks of quarters. It's very hard coded to, January through March is considered quarter 1 versus quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. But if you want a rolling month, a rolling quarter of, basically 3 months, then it gets a little more interesting. So let's take a look at this one. This one is the most complicated. So similar to our rolling months, DATEDIFF, right? We create a years, we grab our today, grab our date, we grab our years. So we create our year table just like before. We create our quarters table. Again, I could have used a generate series 1 to 4, incremental 1, but I just hard coded the table in there. Wasn't much type. It's actually less typing. So I have my quarters 1 through 4. I cross join those. I create the Cartesian product of them. I add a column of the year quarter, which is the year times 100 plus quarter, right? I can then do the same filtering I did with month, the same logic that we used in our rolling month. Now, the interesting thing is that is just kind of and I do a count rows of it. That's kind of just the setup so that I can generate another table to create my rolling quarters table. And what I do here is I do a generate series of 1 to count, increments of 1. I add a column called date. And in that date column, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing end of month, today, and EO month, right? One of my favorite functions. EO month of today, and I should have used the underscore today variable, but I didn't. That's on me. I fix that later. And since we're using 3 months, right, I do a -3 times my value column. So my generate series from 1 to count, right? So that'll generate. So for each of my columns in that, each of my rows in that table, right, I'll have a value that's either 3 months in the past or 6 months in the past or 9 months in the past, etc. But it's at the end of the month. So to get it to be a roll, to enforce our rolling aspect of that quarter, I create we use our results. We say date, year of EO month of EO month, and then day of today. And I properly use the today variable in that case. So, and we return that result. So now we have a column, a single row or a table of values, which has, our actual rolling quarter dates in them. All we have to do then, filter that table where the date is less than or equal to day and greater than or equal to date, and turn the result and the result plus 0 so that we get our zeros instead of blanks. And as you can see with date diff quarter, we have 0, 0, 1, 2, 4, 4, 5, 6. In a rolling scenario, right, we get 0, 0, 1, 1, because it's only 1 quarter behind. The break point of that quarter would be 12/4, 20, or 12, yeah, 12/4. Anything less than 12/4, 2023, anything less than that would fall into quarter two quarters behind. And then you can see the break right here in the more clearly in our June 14th, it falls only 3 quarters behind versus June 1st, since it's less than the 4th, the day is less than June 4th, then it falls 4 quarters behind, and then 5 and 5. So that is how you create rolling date diffs. And, and again, I just, similar to time intelligence stuff, there's so much that's assumed in terms of those functions and how they work. And when you don't want you don't want your calculations to quite work that way, you run into problems like this. So I'll probably post this out to the quick measure gallery at some point. Maybe I'll extend this solution so that it handles negatives. That's a pretty simple change to this, to be able to handle, basically the way date diff, which didn't originally, fun fact, date diff really didn't originally handle negative numbers. So you can actually return an error, but they fixed that years and years ago. But I can extend this to do that. And if somebody's really interested and really wants to know how to do something like this for the time values as well, so date diff in terms of hours, minutes, seconds, and that sort of thing, let me know, and I'll give that a shot as well. So that is all I had for today. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.